I'm a clarinet player from Perth in Australia, and the piece of music I just played for you is an Australian piece by Ross Edwards. It is called Ulpira, and Ulpira is an Australian Aboriginal word for bird, and in that piece you can hear birds twittering to each other and dancing in the sky as they fly around. Why don't we start off with first learning exactly where I am in the world making this video. Here I've got my globe of the world, and I'm going to take us to Western Australia. And down at the bottom of Western Australia is the city in which I live, which is called Perth. It's a pretty medium-sized city, roughly the size of Boston. Perth is one of the most isolated cities in the world. In fact, it's easier for me to get to some cities in Asia, and quicker for me to get to some cities in Asia, than it is for me to get to some of them cities within Australia. So when I come from Perth to California, I have to travel a really, really long way. In fact, it takes about 20 hours in the aeroplane. I have to catch 2 aeroplanes to be able to get there. The first aeroplane goes from Perth and it flies across Australia to Sydney in New South Wales. And then after I've arrived in Sydney, I then travel via aeroplane across the Pacific Ocean all the way to California. And when I cross the Pacific Ocean, I cross what's called the International Date Line. And that means that time goes backwards. And this staggers me every time I come to California. So the time that I leave Perth at, say if I left at 8 a.m. in the morning, because I cross over the International Date Line, I actually will arrive in California at 8 a.m. in the morning, despite having been in a plane for 20 hours. And that's because the plane travels at roughly the same rate at which the aeroplane flies across the planet. Perth and California, even though they're very, very far apart from each other, actually have lots of things in common. Perth is a really beautiful, hot, desert-like climate, and we have amazing beaches, a lot like California. And my favourite thing to do in Perth, apart from practice the clarinet, is to go to Cottesloe Beach and to swim in the Indian Ocean. That's the other really big ocean on the other side of the world, different to the Pacific Ocean next to California. So, next year I really look forward to making that trip across Australia and then up to California to see you guys. Let's introduce ourselves to the instruments of the clarinet family. One of the great things about being a clarinetist is that I get to play lots of different versions of the same instrument. And here I've got 5 different clarinets. There are in fact even more clarinets, but these are just some that I have with me today. They range from the smallest clarinet, which is called the Piccolo clarinet, or the E-flat clarinet. It's because it's tuned in E-flat, and that's this tiny one here, all the way through to the bass clarinet, which is this one here. As the clarinets get bigger, the pitch of the instruments get lower. Let's see this in action. I'm going to play for you a little phrase from that piece we heard before, Ulpira, on each of these instruments. First of all, the E-flat clarinet. It's the highest of the clarinets. The E-flat clarinet has a really high shrill sound and it's very, very loud. And in fact, when you get to play it in the orchestra, this instrument itself can play almost as loud as the rest of the orchestra. And so it's really easy to stand out from the crowd. The next instrument I have here is called a clarinet in C. So we have the E-flat clarinet tuned in E-flat. Now we have a step bigger, the clarinet in C. And you'll notice that I'm borrowing different mouthpieces from the instruments. Some instruments share the same mouthpiece, some of them have their own mouthpieces. So I'm going to put this mouthpiece onto the C clarinet and I'll show you the same phrase from opera. It's going to be a little bit deeper. Then we come another step lower again, and this is the instrument that I probably play the most. This is called the B-flat clarinet, and this is the clarinet that you might play in band at school, and it's also the clarinet that most composers write for when writing for the clarinet in the orchestra. Now this instrument comes in a pair. The A clarinet is ever so slightly longer than the B-flat clarinet. Can you see that? And that means that I also play the A clarinet in the orchestra quite often as well. Let's have a listen to the A clarinet, and it's half a step lower. Then we come to my favourite of all the clarinets, and that is the bass clarinet. The bass clarinet is exactly twice as big as the B-flat clarinet. So the bass clarinet is also in B-flat, but it is what we call an octave lower. Let's have a listen to the bass clarinet. In fact, it's so big I have to wear a harness that holds the instrument up so that I don't drop it while I'm playing it. In fact, I can hold it up with no hands. So the bass clarinet is my favourite instrument, and I'm going to show you why in a moment. Now, as a clarinet player, I get to play lots of classical music, so music composed by people like Mozart and Beethoven, but the music that I really love to play, even though I like playing Mozart and Beethoven, is the really cool contemporary classical music. And that's because I get to do some pretty special things with the instruments when I'm playing contemporary music. So for instance, the clarinet is great at making a sound that we call a glissando, which is where I slide from one note to the next in pitch. Have a listen to this. special slide is called a glissando, and it sounds a little bit like a police siren. Let's have a listen to it again. And sometimes glissandos get used in lots of folk music as well. Now, the bass clarinet is especially good at doing some of these cool sounds used in contemporary music. One of my favourite of these sounds is called a slap tongue. So in the clarinet we've got normal tonguing. So that's me using my tongue in a normal way when playing the instrument. It's very nice, but it's not as cool as a slap tongue. Check this out. Now that is something really cool. And what I'm doing, it took me a long time to practice this, is I'm creating a vacuum inside my mouth and I'm exploding that vacuum against the instrument, and that gives me that really cool popping sound. So that's called slap tongue. The next thing that the bass clarinet is really good at as well is what a special technique that we call a spectral sweep. And it's called a spectral sweep because I'm sweeping through all the possible colours of the clarinet, and I'm playing many pitches at the same time. Have a listen to this. It sounds a little bit like an elephant, or the Australian Aboriginal instrument, the Didgeridoo. And these things actually have something in common. They're both long pipes, a little bit like an elephant's nose, or the long pipe of the Aboriginal Didgeridoo, or the bass clarinet. So I can break up the sound and I can produce that amazing colour. And I can in fact play the American national anthem to a spectral sweep. That's a bit of fun. Another technique that I get to do on the clarinet is circular breathing. And what circular breathing allows me to do, it allows me to play a note for a very long time. In fact, if I had to, I could play a note for several hours. And that's because I can breathe in and out of my nose while playing the clarinet at the same time. Let's have a look at this in action. So what I'm doing when I take a circular breath is that I'm pushing air out with my cheeks while at the same time sniffing air in through my nose. So there are just some of the fancy tricks that I can perform on my clarinets. I've been asked the question, how has my life changed since the coronavirus pandemic? And these have been some really interesting times to be a human being on the planet. I've never experienced anything like this in my entire life. And I'd have to say that the biggest change that has happened has been the impossibility for me to travel. I'm not allowed to even travel outside of Perth, let alone to other parts of Australia at the moment, and that's made it really difficult for me to come to California. So I was meant to be coming to the USA in just a few weeks' time. However, that won't happen because of the travel restrictions that are occurring with the pandemic. So that's something that I'm a little bit sad about, but I'm glad that we have a really good government that's telling us what we need to do in order to remain really, really healthy as a society. The next question I've been asked is, who is my musical hero and why? And this might come as a bit of as a surprise because I play the clarinet. My musical hero is not a clarinettist, and it's not someone who in fact plays a wind instrument, but it is in fact two people who are singers. And these singers are Luciano Pavarotti and Cecilia Bartoli. And both of these singers are from Italy. But what I love about what these people do is that they actually show me how to play the clarinet. If you can sing really well, and if you know how to breathe really well, and how to use your body to support the air when you play, that's going to make you a really, really good clarinet player. So whenever I need some inspiration, I go and have a look at Pavarotti and Cecilia Bartoli, and they remind me the really good way that I should use my body to play the instrument. Another of my heroes are in fact people who are athletes, and I really love performing athletics and doing fitness style things. I do a style of fitness called CrossFit. And one of my heroes is the Australian female CrossFitter Tia Toomey, and that's because she is one of the strongest people in the world, and she can do some really awesome CrossFit things. So they're my heroes. We've got a CrossFitter and we've got a couple of opera singers as well. It's been so much fun to show you my clarinets and to show you some of the cool tricks that these instruments can do, and I really look forward to meeting you in the flesh when I'm in California next year. Thanks so much for listening, and we'll see you soon.